The wind howled across the barren plateau like a wounded animal, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of harder times ahead. It was the kind of wind that stripped paint from barn walls and hope from men's hearts. The kind that had been blowing since the world was young and would keep blowing long after the last ranch hand had hung up his spurs. Caleb Morgan stood at the edge of the fresh-turned earth, his weathered hands gripping the black mourning kerchief so tight his knuckles had gone white as sun-bleached bone. The mound before him was still dark with morning dew, not yet settled, not yet accepting of its burden. Beneath it lay Margaret, his bride of barely 2 years, taken by what folks called an accident, but what Caleb knew in his gut was something darker. The cemetery stretched out lonely and windswept on the hill overlooking Mercy's Bend, a collection of wooden crosses and stone markers that told the hard history of the frontier. Some graves held children taken by fever, others men shot down in disputes over water rights or card games gone wrong. Margaret's was the newest, the dirt still loose enough that the wind carved little rivulets in its surface. Dust to dust, the preacher had said that morning, his words snatched away by the same relentless wind. But Margaret hadn't been dust. She'd been flesh and blood, with hands that could gentle a spooked mare and eyes the color of prairie sky before a storm. Now she was nothing but memory and this small hill of earth behind him. Caleb could hear the whispers starting up again, carried on that cursed wind from the cluster of townspeople who'd lingered after the burial. They thought he couldn't hear, or maybe they didn't care. "Wealthy as Midas, that one," came the rasp of Samuel Henley, who ran the general store and measured a man's worth in the credit he could extend. All that land, all them cattle, and couldn't keep his own wife safe. "Some say it weren't no accident," another voice chimed in. This one belonging to Martha Pretty, the banker's wife who collected gossip like some women collected china dolls. Strange how she fell from that horse, experienced rider like she was. "The Lord's justice, perhaps," added a third voice, pious and sharp. "Pride goeth before a fall, and the Morgans always did hold their heads too high for common folk." Caleb's jaw clenched, but he didn't turn. Let them talk. They'd been talking since the day he'd brought Margaret home as his bride, a woman too young and beautiful for a man who'd already seen 40 winters. They'd talked when he'd expanded his holdings, buying up failed homesteads and abandoned claims. They'd talk until their tongues turned to dust in their mouths. The sun was climbing now, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust. In the distance, he could see his ranch spread out like a kingdom, thousands of acres of grassland, the silver thread of Willow Creek cutting through it, the dark smudge of cattle grazing in the far pastures. It was an empire built on sweat and stubbornness, on surviving droughts and floods, Indian raids and market crashes, and now it felt as empty as a played-out mine. A rider appeared on the eastern ridge, moving at an easy lope toward the cemetery. Caleb recognized his foreman, Jake Sullivan, by the way he sat his horse straight back despite his 60 years, hat tilted against the sun. Jake had been with him since the beginning, when the Morgan Ranch was nothing but a dugout shelter and dreams too big for sense. "Boss," Jake said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose bones had been broken and healed too many times. His face was a map of deep lines and old scars, eyes the faded blue of winter sky. "Thought you should know. We got company coming. That seamstress from town, the Hart woman, says she's here about the burial clothes and such." Caleb finally turned from the grave. "Send her away. We've no need—" "Begging your pardon, but we do," Jake interrupted, something he rarely did. "Margaret's things, they need tending, the house." He trailed off, but Caleb knew what he meant. The house had become a monument to neglect in the days since Margaret's death. Curtains torn by his own hands in grief, clothing scattered. The careful order she'd maintained dissolved into chaos. "The Hart woman," Caleb repeated. Trying to place her, he had a vague memory of a young woman with steady hands and serious eyes, someone who kept to herself and did honest work. "She comes recommended. She mended my Sarah's wedding dress when the mice got to it," one of the lingering townswomen called out. Apparently, deciding eavesdropping wasn't sin enough and joining the conversation was required. It was Constance Fletcher, the schoolmarm, one of the few in town who'd shown Margaret genuine kindness. Does fine work, though she's got no family to speak of. Keeps to herself mostly. Ain't proper? A young woman alone coming to a house a morning, Martha Pretty interjected, her voice dripping disapproval like honey from a comb. People will talk. People always talk, Caleb said, his voice carrying the kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather. Let them. As if summoned by the conversation, a figure appeared on the road, a woman driving a small wagon pulled by a sturdy bay mare. Even from a distance, Caleb could see she handled the reins with competence, navigating the rutted track without hesitation. As she drew closer, more details emerged. A plain brown dress, practical and well-mended, honey-colored hair pulled back in a severe bun, a face that might have been pretty if it ever smiled. Eliza Hart brought her wagon to a stop, a respectful distance from the cemetery gate. She didn't immediately climb down, instead taking in the scene, the fresh grave, the lingering townspeople, the tall man in black who stood like a scarecrow in a field of sorrow. When she did descend, it was with economical grace, every movement purposeful. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice carrying despite the wind. Not shouting, just pitched to be heard. "I've come about the household matters we discussed. If the time is wrong—" "We didn't discuss anything," Caleb said flatly. "Your foreman, Mr. Sullivan, came by my shop yesterday." Her chin lifted slightly, the only sign she gave of being affected by his tone. "He said there was need of my services." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I took the liberty, boss. Figured it needed doing." For a long moment, Caleb studied the seamstress. She met his gaze without flinching, her eyes gray as morning mist, holding neither the pity nor the morbid curiosity he'd seen in others. There was something else there, something he couldn't quite name. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who knew what it was to stand alone. "One day," he said finally. "You can have one day to do what needs doing. Then you leave." Eliza Hart nodded once, crisp and professional. "I'll need access to the house and—" She paused delicately. "The deceased's belongings. Jake will show you." Caleb turned back to the grave, dismissing her, but she wasn't quite done. "Mr. Morgan, I'll also need to take measurements. For the mourning clothes, unless you prefer to continue with what you have." He looked down at his black suit, already showing wear at the seams. Dust ground into fabric that had seen too many years of hard use. Margaret would have hated seeing him like this, would have insisted on proper attire. The thought was a knife between his ribs. "Do what you must," he said. The crowd was dispersing now, climbing into wagons and mounting horses, eager to get back to town where they could discuss the morning's events over coffee and cake. Several of the women paused to whisper warnings to Eliza Hart about the house, about the man, about the wisdom of taking on such a task. She listened politely but gave no sign of being swayed. As the last of the townspeople departed, a wall of dust appeared on the horizon, towering and dark as a mountain. The storm rolled toward them with inevitable purpose, turning the sun to a dim orange ball, filling the air with the taste of grit and the smell of rain that might or might not come. "Best get to the house," Jake said, eyeing the approaching storm with the wariness of a man who'd seen what the frontier could dish out. "This one's got teeth." Caleb remained at the graveside as the others hurried to shelter. The wind picked up, howling now like a chorus of the damned, flinging sand that stung like buckshot. He welcomed it, welcomed the pain that was clean and simple compared to the grinding agony in his chest. When the first edge of the storm hit, it was like being slapped by a giant's hand. The world disappeared in a wall of brown. The sun blotted out. The very air turned solid with dust. Caleb stood his ground, letting it batter him, letting it scour him clean like the bones in the desert. Somewhere in that howling maelstrom, he thought he heard Margaret's voice, thought he felt her hand in his, but when he reached for her, There was only wind and sand and the terrible finality of earth over wood, over flesh that would never again know his touch. By the time he finally turned toward home, the storm had begun to pass, leaving the world scoured and strange in its wake. The house sat on its rise like a ship run aground, windows glowing faintly with lamplight. Someone, the Heart Woman, most likely, had thought to light them against the dark. For the first time since Margaret's death, the house didn't look entirely abandoned. It was a small thing, those lights in the windows, but it stirred something in Caleb that he immediately crushed. Hope was a luxury he could no longer afford, a weakness that led only to greater pain. Still, as he walked toward that light, his steps were steadier than they'd been in days. Behind him, the wind gentled to a whisper, and the fresh-turned earth of Margaret's grave began its slow work of settling, of accepting, of becoming part of the landscape that would outlast them all. In the house on the hill, Eliza Hart moved through rooms thick with dust and sorrow, her capable hands already beginning the work of mending what could be mended, accepting what couldn't, and preparing for whatever storms were yet to come. The Morgan house stood like a wounded beast against the prairie sky, its windows dark as empty eye sockets, its walls bearing the scars of weather and neglect. Eliza Hart paused at the threshold, her arms full of fabric and sewing supplies, taking in the magnitude of what lay before her. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and something else, the peculiar staleness that comes when grief has soaked into the very walls. Sheets covered furniture like shrouds, and cobwebs draped the corners despite the house having been lived in until just days ago. It was as if sorrow itself had aged the place, turning what must have once been a home into something more akin to a tomb. Caleb Morgan sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow, staring at nothing. He'd been sitting there since returning from the cemetery, still in his dust-covered funeral clothes, looking like a man carved from granite. The only sign of life was the occasional blink, slow and mechanical. "Mr. Morgan," Eliza said softly from the doorway. "I'll need to work in several rooms. Should I begin with—" "Do what you want," he said without looking at her. His voice was flat as hammered tin. "The house is yours for the day." She studied him for a moment longer, noting the tremor in his hands, the way his shoulders curved inward as if protecting some mortal wound. Then she turned away, knowing that some grief was too private for witnessing. The bedroom told its own story of loss. One side of the bed remained perfectly made, while the other showed signs of restless nights, sheets twisted into ropes, pillows thrown to the floor. The wardrobe hung open, revealing a rainbow of women's dresses that would never again know their owner's warmth. On the dresser, a silver brush still held strands of dark hair. Eliza set down her supplies and began her work methodically. First, she gathered the torn curtains, examining each rip with professional eyes. Some were clean tears, easily mended. Others showed the violence of their making, fabric yanked from rings, seams split by desperate hands. These she set aside. They would need more than simple stitching to make whole again. As she worked, she became aware of eyes upon her. Caleb had moved from his study to the doorway, watching her handle his wife's things with something between suspicion and desperate hope. "She made those curtains herself," he said suddenly. "Ordered the fabric from San Francisco. Took her 3 months to get the pleating just right." Eliza's hand stilled on the cream-colored damask. "They're beautiful work. Your wife had a fine hand." "Had." The word fell between them like a stone in still water. "Everything's had now. Past tense, done and gone. The curtains remain," Eliza said carefully. "Torn, yes, but the beauty of the work, that endures. It can be restored." Caleb's laugh was bitter as wormwood. "Can it? Can anything?" He moved into the room, his presence filling it like smoke. "Do you know what they're saying in town, Miss Hart? They're saying I killed her, that I pushed her from that horse because I wanted—" "What? Her money?" "She had none. Her land. It was already mine. Her life." His voice broke on the last word. "I've heard the talk," Eliza admitted. not stopping her work. I've also heard that Mercy's Bend has more gossips than a henhouse has chickens. Talk is cheap. Mr. Morgan, the truth generally costs more. He stared at her, this plain woman in her serviceable dress, who spoke of truth as if it were currency. And what do you think the truth is? Eliza set down her needle and met his gaze squarely. I think a woman who could create such beautiful things, who was loved enough to inspire such grief, didn't die by her husband's hand. I think accidents happen on the frontier every day, and people need someone to blame because random tragedy is harder to bear than human evil. You didn't know her, Caleb said, but some of the edge had left his voice. No, Eliza agreed. But I know fabric, I know stitches. I know the difference between a hand that creates and one that destroys. Everything in this room speaks of creation, of care, even the violence done to these curtains. That's the work of grief, not anger. Caleb turned away, moving to the window where the torn curtains let in bars of harsh sunlight. Beyond the glass, the ranch stretched endlessly, cattle moving like dark spots across the yellowed grass. We barely knew each other when we married, he said, the words coming slow and painful. Her father owed me money, a lot of money. The ranch he'd built was failing, drought and bad decisions eating it alive. I offered a solution. A business arrangement, Eliza said. Understanding. That's what it was supposed to be. She'd keep her family's land. I'd get a wife to run my household. Maybe give me sons to carry on the name. Simple, clean. He pressed his palm against the glass. But Margaret, she wasn't simple. She was like trying to hold quicksilver. Wild one minute, proper lady the next. She'd ride out before dawn, racing across the prairie like the devil was on her heels. Then come back and host tea for the church ladies, like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Eliza had moved to the wardrobe now, carefully removing dresses to check for damage. Each garment told its own story. A blue silk with mud stains at the hem from walking in the garden, a green wool with tiny repairs where thorns had caught, a lavender cotton faded from sun and washing, the clothes of a woman who lived, not just existed. She hated me at first. Caleb continued, lost in memory, made no secret of it, said I'd bought her like cattle, branded her with my name. First month, she wouldn't speak to me except when others were present. Second month, she took to leaving the house at odd hours, trying to scandalize me into setting her free. But something changed, Eliza prompted gently when he fell silent. Winter came early that year. Blizzard caught her out on the prairie. I found her half frozen, her horse lame, huddled in a buffalo wallow. Should have been dead. His hand clenched against the window frame. I carried her home, stayed up 3 nights nursing her through the fever. When she finally woke, she looked at me different, like she was seeing me for the first time. And after that, Caleb's voice softened. After that, she was my wife. Not just in name, but in truth. We had 2 years of her singing in the morning, of finding wildflowers on my pillow, of watching her gentle the meanest horses like they were lapdogs. 2 years of thinking maybe I'd done something right for once in my worthless life. The silence stretched between them, filled with the whisper of fabric and the distant lowing of cattle. Eliza worked steadily, her hands sure and careful, bringing order to chaos 1 stitch at a time. How did it happen? She asked finally. If you don't mind speaking of it. Caleb's shoulders tensed. She was riding out to check on the pregnant mares. Horse spooked, snake, maybe, or a rabbit. Threw her. Head hit a rock. The words came out clipped, factual, but Eliza heard the pain beneath them. Jake found her, brought her home across his saddle like a shot deer. She was still breathing then, but... He stopped, unable to continue. I'm sorry, Eliza said simply. It's a hard thing, losing someone sudden like that. The doctor said she never woke up. Small mercy, I suppose, but I keep thinking, what if I'd gone with her? What if I'd insisted she take Jake or one of the hands? What if, until I'm half mad with it. Eliza set aside the dress she'd been examining and moved to where he stood. Not close enough to intrude, but near enough to be heard clearly. Mr. Morgan, I lost my parents to cholera when I was 15. Spent years wondering what if I'd made them boil the water longer. What if I'd recognized the signs sooner? What if I'd been a better daughter so God wouldn't have taken them? The what-ifs will eat you alive if you let them. He turned to look at her then. Really look at her. She wasn't beautiful in the way Margaret had been, all fire and flash. But there was something steady about her, like bedrock under shifting sand. How do you stop them? You don't, she said honestly. But you learn to live with them. You do the next thing that needs doing, and then the next. You mend what can be mended. You accept what can't, and slowly, the what-ifs lose their power to paralyze you. Is that why you became a seamstress? Mending things. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Perhaps there's satisfaction in taking something torn and making it whole again. Even if the mend shows, even if it's not quite what it was before, it's still useful, still beautiful in its own way. Caleb studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the calluses on her fingers from years of needlework. The townspeople warned you about coming here. They did. Told you I was dangerous, a killer. They told me many things. Yet you came anyway. Eliza returned to her work, picking up a black jacket that needed new buttons. Mr. Morgan, I've been on my own since I was 15. I've heard every warning there is about what a woman alone shouldn't do, where she shouldn't go, who she shouldn't associate with. If I listened to all of them, I'd never leave my shop. She threaded her needle with practiced ease. Besides, killers don't generally grieve the way you're grieving. And how is that? Like a man whose world has ended. She said simply, I've seen men who've done violence. They carry it different, in their shoulders, in their eyes. You carry loss, not guilt. At least not the kind of guilt they're trying to put on you. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The wind had picked up again, rattling the windows in their frames, sending tumbleweeds racing across the yard like fleeing spirits. Storm coming, Caleb observed, grateful for the change of subject. Could be a bad one. You should finish up, get back to town before it hits. I've a few hours yet, Eliza said calmly, and I'm not afraid of a little weather. This isn't a little weather, Caleb warned. Desert storms can turn deadly fast, flash floods in the arroyos, lightning that'll cook you where you stand, hail big as hen's eggs. Then I'd best work quickly, she said, but made no move to pack up her supplies. Caleb watched her for another moment. This stubborn woman who seemed determined to bring order to his chaos whether he wanted it or not. Then he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Eliza worked on as the light faded and the storm built. She rehung the mended curtains, arranged the closet, packed away the dresses that were too painful for daily viewing. As she worked, she found other signs of the life that had been lived here, a love letter tucked in a glove box, a pressed flower between the pages of a hymnal, a half-finished embroidery of wild roses. Each discovery was a small heartbreak, a reminder that Margaret Morgan had been more than just a rich man's wife, more than a subject for gossip. She had been a woman with hopes and dreams, with small daily rituals and private jokes. She had been loved, and she had loved in return, whatever the circumstances of her marriage's beginning. By the time Eliza finished in the bedroom, full dark had fallen. The storm was almost upon them, the air electric with its approach. She gathered her supplies and made her way downstairs, where she found Caleb standing at the front window, watching the lightning dance across the prairie. You stayed too late, he said without turning. You'll have to shelter here tonight. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, it's a necessity. He gestured toward the window where the first fat drops of rain were beginning to fall. No one travels in weather like this and lives to tell about it. Jake will see your horse is stabled. There's a guest room at the end of the hall, as if to emphasize his point. A crack of thunder shook the house, rattling dishes in their cupboards. The rain went from scattered drops to a torrential downpour in seconds, turning the world outside into a solid wall of water. Thank you, Eliza said, recognizing the futility of argument. I'll try not to be a bother. Miss Hart, Caleb said, finally turning to face her. In the lamplight, his face was all shadows and sharp angles, carved by grief into something austere and compelling. This house hasn't seen such care in too long. You're no bother. They stood there for a moment, the storm raging outside, the house groaning under the assault of wind and rain. Then Eliza nodded and turned toward the stairs, leaving Caleb to his vigil at the window. As she climbed the stairs, she could hear him speaking, so soft she almost missed it under the storm's fury. She would have liked you, Margaret. She would have liked you very much. The words followed her into the guest room, where she lay listening to the storm and wondering what tomorrow would bring to this house of sorrow and secrets, where the past hung as heavy as the torn curtains she'd spent the day mending, and where a wealthy rancher's grief was as vast and wild as the prairie itself. The night brought violence to the Morgan Ranch, though not from the storm that had passed through like a freight train of wind and water. Eliza woke to the sound of horses, many horses, and men's voices raised in ugly purpose. She lay still in the guest room bed, straining to hear over the pounding of her heart. "Morgan," the voice was rough, slurred with drink or malice or both. "Get out here, you murdering bastard. Time to settle accounts." Through the window, Eliza could see torches bobbing in the darkness like demon eyes. She counted at least 8 riders, maybe more. They'd spread out in a semicircle before the house, cutting off any escape route. She heard Caleb's footsteps in the hallway, steady and unhurried. He passed her door without pause, heading downstairs. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Eliza rose and followed, pulling a shawl over her nightdress. She found him in the front room, checking the loads in a Winchester rifle with the calm efficiency of a man who'd done it many times before. Jake Sullivan was already there, his own weapon in hand, gray hair wild from sleep but his eyes sharp as flint. "How many?" Caleb asked without looking up. 10, maybe 12. Jake replied. "That's Bart Hutchins leading them. I'd recognize his whiskey voice anywhere. Got the Deacon brothers with him, and some others I can't make out in the dark." "Land grabbers," Caleb said, and it wasn't a question. "They've been sniffing around the water rights for months, using Margaret's death as an excuse." Jake spat. "Bastard's probably been planning this since the funeral." Eliza pressed herself against the wall, trying to make sense of what was happening. Through the window, she could see the riders more clearly now. Hard men with harder faces, the kind who'd sell their own mothers for 40 acres and water access. "Morgan!" Hutchins shouted again. "We know what you did. Killed your own wife for her land, didn't you? Well, we're here to see justice done." "Justice," Caleb said softly, almost amused. "Is that what they're calling it now?" He moved to the door, rifle held loose but ready. Jake grabbed his arm. "Don't be a fool, boss. They're looking for an excuse to shoot you down." "They'll shoot anyway," Caleb said. "Might as well face them on my feet." He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. A lone figure backlit by the lamplight from inside. Eliza could see him clearly from her position. Tall, unbending, facing down the mob with the same stoic courage he'd shown at his wife's graveside. "Hutchins?" he called out, his voice carrying clear in the night air. "Strange time for a social call. No society with murderers." Hutchins snarled. He was a big man gone to fat, his face florid even in the torchlight. "We're here to give you a choice. Morgan, sign over the water rights to Willow Creek. Pack up and get out of the territory, or we'll bury you next to that wife you killed. Margaret's father owed me money." Caleb said evenly. "A lot of money. I married her to settle the debt and save her family's land. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows you wanted more." One of the Deacon brothers called out, "Luther or Josiah." Eliza couldn't tell which in the dark. "Wanted her daddy's water rights added to your own. When sweet talk didn't work, you tried fear. When fear didn't work." He made a gesture across his throat. "You're drunk," Caleb said. "All of you, go home before someone gets hurt." "Someone already got hurt," Hutchins shot back. "Pretty little Margaret. Dead because she wouldn't sign over what you wanted. Well, we're tired of you rich bastards thinking you own everything, including people's lives. You want my land, Caleb said flatly. That's what this is about. You've wanted it since the day I proved up on it. Margaret's death is just your excuse. Maybe so, Hutchins admitted with the ugly grin. But it's a good excuse, ain't it? Poor girl, married off to pay her daddy's debts, then killed when she proved too spirited for your liking. Folks in town are mighty upset about it. Why, if you were to die resisting arrest for her murder, I doubt many would mourn. What arrest? Jake called from the doorway. I don't see no sheriff, just a bunch of claim jumpers and whiskey-brave cowards. Shut your mouth, old man, Luther Deacon snarled. Or we'll shut it permanent. It was then that Eliza made a decision that would have been called foolish by anyone with sense. She stepped out onto the porch, still in her nightdress and shawl, moving to stand beside Caleb. The sight of her, a respectable woman in night clothes, caused a ripple of uncertainty through the riders. Miss Hart, Hutchins said, recovering first. What are you doing here? This ain't no place for a lady. I'm doing my work, Eliza said calmly. Mr. Morgan hired me to tend to household matters after his wife's passing. I was caught by the storm and took shelter for the night. Nothing improper about it, as Mr. Sullivan can attest. Still, Josiah Deacon leered. Mighty convenient, the grieving widower and the seamstress. Maybe you're looking to take poor Margaret's place, eh? Strike while the iron's hot? Watch your tongue, Caleb said, and there was death in his voice. Or what? Josiah challenged. You'll kill us like you killed her? I've heard enough, Eliza interrupted before Caleb could respond. Mr. Hutchins, you say you want justice for Margaret Morgan. Yet here you are in the dead of night, threatening violence, making vile insinuations. Is this how justice is done in Mercy's Bend? With torches and mob rule? You don't understand, Miss, Hutchins said, trying for a reasonable tone. This man is dangerous. We're protecting the community. From what? Eliza challenged. A man mourning his wife. I've been in this house all day. Gentlemen, I've seen Margaret Morgan's belongings, her needlework, her letters. I've seen how carefully her things were kept, how lovingly they were preserved. These are not the signs of an abusive marriage. You don't know, Luther Deacon started. I know grief when I see it. Eliza cut him off. I know the difference between a house where love lived and one where fear ruled. And I know that if Margaret Morgan could see you now, using her death as an excuse for theft and violence, she would be ashamed. You didn't know her, Hutchins protested. No, Eliza agreed. But I spent today learning about her through the things she left behind. She was a woman of refinement and courage. Do you really think she would want her memory used this way, as a tool for land grabbers and opportunists? The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Some of the riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. The moral high ground they'd claimed was starting to feel shaky under Eliza's steady gaze. Fine words, Hutchins said finally. But they don't change facts. Morgan here had reason to want his wife dead, and dead she is. The law requires evidence. A new voice interrupted. Sheriff William Thornton rode into the torchlight, his badge glinting, his face set in grim lines. Behind him came two deputies, rifles across their saddles, which is why I'm mighty curious what you boys are doing out here playing vigilante. Sheriff, Hutchins said, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. We were just— I know what you were just. Thornton cut him off. Mrs. Fletcher sent her boy running to town when she saw you riding out this way. Said you were liquored up and talking about a hanging. No one said nothing about hanging. Luther Deacon protested weakly. Then what's the rope for? Thornton pointed to Josiah's saddle horn, where a coil of hemp sat like a promise of death. You boys planning to help Morgan round up strays? Silence fell, broken only by the creak of leather and the distant howl of a coyote. The sheriff was a hard man, fair but unbending when it came to the law. He'd kept Mercy's Bend from descending into chaos more than once, and everyone knew he wouldn't tolerate mob justice. Here's what's going to happen, Thornton said. You boys are going to turn around and ride back to town. You're going to sleep off whatever rot-gut courage you've been drinking. And if I hear so much as a whisper about any of you bothering Mr. Morgan, or his property again. You'll be explaining yourselves to Judge Patterson. That clear? But Sheriff, Hutchins tried one more time. The woman. Mrs. Morgan's death was a tragedy. Thornton said firmly, I investigated it myself, found no evidence of foul play. Her horse came back with cactus spines in its flank. Likely what caused it to throw her. Unless you've got evidence I missed, this matter is closed. The mob deflated completely, one by one. They turned their horses, Hutchins last of all. As he wheeled his mount, he locked eyes with Caleb. This ain't over. Morgan, the sheriff can't protect you forever. He doesn't need to, Jake Sullivan said. His rifle prominent. Some of us remember what loyalty means. After the riders disappeared into the darkness, Sheriff Thornton dismounted, his movement stiff from the hard ride. You all right, Caleb? Fine, Caleb said shortly, though I'm curious how quickly you got here. Thornton's weathered face cracked in a slight smile. Let's say I've been keeping an eye on Hutchins and his crew. Had a feeling they might try something like this. He tipped his hat to Eliza. Ma'am, sorry you had to witness this ugliness. I'm glad I was here, Eliza said honestly, though I fear I may have made things worse by speaking out. You did right, Thornton assured her. Sometimes a woman's voice of reason can cool heads where a man's would only heat them up. He turned back to Caleb. You know this isn't the end of it. Hutchins wants your water bad, and he's not the only one. They'll be back, maybe not as a mob, but they'll be back. Let them come, Caleb said grimly. Don't be a fool, Thornton said sharply. You can't fight the whole territory. Maybe it's time to consider selling? Caleb's voice was ice. Running. My wife is buried on this land. Sheriff, I'm not leaving her. Thornton sighed. Then watch your back, and maybe think about hiring more hands. Jake's tough as leather, but he can't watch everything alone. After the sheriff and his deputies left, the three of them stood on the porch in silence. The night had turned quiet again, peaceful even, as if the ugliness of the last hour had been a bad dream. I should go back to town in the morning, Eliza said finally. My presence here is only giving them more ammunition. No, Caleb said, surprising them all. You stood up to them, spoke for Margaret when she couldn't speak for herself. That took courage. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I'd appreciate it if you'd finish the work you started. The house needs tending, and He stopped, unable to continue. Of course, Eliza said softly. If you're certain. Nothing's certain anymore, Caleb said, but some things are necessary. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eliza saw something shift in his expression. Not attraction, it was too soon for that, the wound too fresh, but recognition, perhaps, an acknowledgement that she was more than just hired help, that her presence meant something in this house of sorrow. I'll put on coffee, Jake said, breaking the moment. Don't reckon any of us will be sleeping more tonight. As they turned to go inside, Eliza caught Caleb's arm. They'll use my staying here against you, say that I'm... Let them talk, Caleb said. They'll say what they want regardless, at least this way. The house might know some order again. Margaret would want that. Inside, as Jake busied himself with the coffee and Caleb cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision, Eliza sat by the window and watched the stars fade toward dawn. She'd come here to mend curtains and organize closets. Simple women's work for pay. Instead, she'd stepped into a web of greed and violence, where water rights were worth more than human lives and a woman's death was just another card to play in the endless game of frontier acquisition. But she'd also found something else, a man whose grief ran deeper than any well, whose loss had carved him hollow, yet who'd stood against the mob with unflinching courage. Not the monster the town gossips painted, but not a saint either. Just a man, complicated and compromised and utterly alone. The coffee was strong and bitter, like the truth that hung between them all. Come morning, the town would buzz with new gossip. The seamstress who'd spent the night at the Morgan ranch, who'd stood in her nightclothes beside the suspected murderer and defended him to his accusers, Her reputation, carefully built over years of propriety, would be in tatters. Yet, as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, Eliza found she didn't care. Some things mattered more than reputation. Truth was one, courage was another, and perhaps, though she hardly dared name it, the possibility of bringing light back to a house that had known too much darkness. The land grabbers would return. She knew. Men like Hutchins didn't give up easily, especially when water and wealth were at stake. But for now, in this quiet hour before the world woke to its struggles, there was peace. Fragile as frost, temporary as morning dew, but peace nonetheless, and in that peace, Eliza Hart began to understand why she'd really come to the Morgan Ranch, and why, despite all sense and reason, she would stay. The first snow came early that year, drifting down like ash from some distant fire, covering the prairie in a shroud of white. Eliza had been at the Morgan Ranch for 3 weeks now, arriving each morning despite the townspeople's whispers, leaving before dark to maintain some semblance of propriety. But on this day, with the snow falling thick and fast, she knew she'd be staying the night again. The house had transformed under her care. Windows gleamed, floors shone with fresh wax, and the heavy atmosphere of grief, while still present, no longer pressed down quite so oppressively. She'd even coaxed Caleb into allowing fresh flowers in the parlor late-blooming prairie roses that defied the coming winter. But the town's judgment had transformed as well, from whispers to open hostility. Martha Pretty had crossed the street rather than speak to her. The minister's wife had suggested, with false kindness, that perhaps Eliza should seek employment elsewhere. For the good of your reputation, dear, even her landlady had given notice, she'd need to find new lodgings by month's end. Caleb found her in the kitchen, standing at the window watching the snow erase the landscape. "You're troubled," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Hutchins came to see me yesterday," Eliza said without turning. "Offered me work in Denver. Her sister runs a dress shop there. The pay would be better, and I'd be away from all this. Are you considering it?" She finally faced him, noting how the past weeks had aged him further. His dark hair showed gray at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But there was something else too, a gradual thawing, like ice slowly giving way to spring. "I should be," she said honestly. "Any sensible woman would. My reputation is ruined. My lodgings are forfeit, and half the town believes I'm either your accomplice or your next victim. But I know something they don't." She moved to the stove, pouring coffee with steady hands. "I found something yesterday when I was cleaning the attic." Caleb stiffened. "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, Eliza went to her sewing basket and withdrew a leather-bound journal. She handed it to him carefully, as if it might shatter. It was in a trunk with Margaret's summer things. I think you should read it." Caleb stared at the journal as if it were a snake. "That's private." Her private thoughts. "Yes," Eliza agreed. "And normally I would never suggest reading another woman's diary. But there are things in there, things about the days before she died. Things you need to know." With trembling hands, Caleb opened the journal. Margaret's handwriting flowed across the pages, neat and precise. He began to read, his face cycling through emotions, surprise, confusion, growing alarm. "She knew," he said finally, his voice hollow. "She knew someone was watching her." Eliza nodded. The last several entries mention it, a rider following her on her morning rides, messages left where she'd find them, threats. "Caleb, someone was threatening her." "Why didn't she tell me?" The anguish in his voice was terrible to hear. "Read the entry from 3 days before," Eliza said gently. Caleb found the page, read aloud in a voice that shook. C would rage like a bull if he knew. He'd confront them, probably kill someone, certainly get himself arrested or shot. Better to handle this myself. I'm not some delicate flower to be protected. Tomorrow I'll ride out to Skeleton Ridge, where the messages said to meet. I'll face whoever this is and end their games. I won't let anyone threaten what C and I have built together. The journal fell from his nerveless fingers. Skeleton Ridge. That's where Jake found her. She went to meet someone, Eliza said. Someone who'd been threatening her. And that someone killed her. The words came out raw, torn from somewhere deep. Made it look like an accident, and I let them. I buried her thinking God or fate or her own recklessness had taken her, when all along, he stood abruptly, sending his chair crashing backward. I have to go to the sheriff. He needs to see this. Wait. Eliza caught his arm. Think. Who knew about her morning rides? Who had access to leave messages where she'd find them? Who benefits from her death? Caleb's mind was already working. She could see it. Hutchins wants my water rights, but he's too much a coward for murder. The Deacon brothers, maybe, but they're followers, not leaders. Who else? He stopped, his face going white. No. What is it? There's something else, something I didn't want to think about. He sank back into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. Margaret's father didn't just owe me money. He owed others too. When I married her and absorbed his debts, I also absorbed his enemies. Who? Vincent Crane. The name fell between them like a stone. He owns the bank in Cedar Falls, has interests in half the territory. Margaret's father owed him nearly as much as he owed me. Crane wasn't happy when I stepped in, said I'd cheated him out of his rightful claim. On the land. On everything. The land, the water rights, and Margaret herself. He'd had his eye on her, saw marriage as a way to consolidate power. When I married her instead. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. He said I'd regret it. Said I'd stolen what was meant to be his. I thought it was just talk. The snow was falling harder now, turning the world outside into a white void. Somewhere in that blankness, a killer walked free, believing his crime perfect, his secret safe. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. We have to be careful, she said. If Crane killed Margaret, then I'm next. Caleb finished. Or maybe you are, now that you're helping me. God, Eliza, what have I pulled you into? You didn't pull me anywhere, she said firmly. I chose to stay. I choose it still. She paused, then added more softly. Margaret wrote about me too, in the journal. Caleb looked up sharply. What? She saw me in town sometimes, wrote that she admired how I carried myself, alone but not lonely, independent but not bitter. Eliza hesitated, then continued. She wrote that if anything happened to her, she hoped someone like me might help you, someone strong enough to stand against the darkness. She didn't know you, no, but perhaps she knew you, knew what you'd need. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Margaret's words settling over them like snow. Finally, Caleb spoke. What do we do now? First, we make copies of the relevant journal entries. Then we take them to Sheriff Thornton, quietly, without alerting anyone. And then, Eliza stood, moved to the window again. Then we wait for Crane to make his next move. He's not a patient man, Caleb said. If he thinks his plan is working, he'll push harder. The accusations, the mob, trying to drive me off the land, it all makes sense now. Which means it will get worse before it gets better. You should leave. Caleb said suddenly. Take the job in Denver. Get far away from this while you can. Eliza turned from the window, her gray eyes steady on his. Is that what you want, for me to leave? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. These past weeks had changed things, shifted the ground beneath their feet. What had started as a business arrangement mending clothes, ordering a household, had become something else. Not romance, not yet. It was too soon. The ghost of Margaret too present, but connection, understanding, the recognition of kindred spirits in a harsh world. No, Caleb admitted. God help me, but no. You're the only point of light in this darkness. But I can't ask you to stay, not knowing what's coming. You're not asking, I'm choosing. Eliza moved back to the table, sat across from him. My parents died because of contaminated water. Did I ever tell you that? The whole town knew the well was bad, but the man who owned it, A man very much like Vincent Crane kept it open because closing it would cost him money. 30 people died, including my parents. Eliza. I was too young to fight then. Too scared. Too alone. I'm not that girl anymore. Her hands were steady as she reached for the journal. Margaret tried to face this alone to protect you. Look how that ended. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. Caleb. Not anymore. He studied her face. This remarkable woman who'd walked into his house of grief and somehow made it bearable. You know what people will say. What they're already saying. That I'm a fortune hunter? That I'm dishonoring Margaret's memory? That I'm fool enough to fall for a dangerous man? Eliza's smile was sharp as a blade. Let them talk. Their words can't hurt me half as much as the truth can hurt them. The truth, Caleb repeated. You really think we can prove it? Crane's careful, connected. He owns half the law in 3 counties. But not Sheriff Thornton, and not Judge Patterson, and definitely not us. She stood, began gathering the tea things with brisk efficiency. You asked what we do now? We survive. We endure. We gather our proof and wait for our moment. And we don't let them win. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and new. The prairie that had been brown and gold that morning was now white as a blank page, waiting to be written upon. Jake appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. Rider coming, he said tersely. Moving fast despite the weather. Caleb was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle that was never far from hand these days, but Eliza touched his arm. Wait, look! Through the swirling snow, a familiar figure emerged, Sheriff Thornton, hunched against the cold, his horse laboring through the growing drifts. They met him at the door. His face was grim, ice crystals in his mustache. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Vincent Crane just rode into town with 12 men. Says he's got papers, old debt documents, claims against the estate. He's saying that with Margaret dead and no heirs, her father's obligations revert. He's claiming right of seizure on half your land. Caleb, the half with the water. Caleb's face could have been carved from stone. Let me guess. He generously offered to buy me out instead. For 1/10 of what it's worth. Said you could take it and leave with some dignity, or stay and lose everything. Thornton stomped snow from his boots. There's more. He's got witnesses now. 2 drifters who claim they saw you arguing with Margaret the morning she died. Say they heard you threaten her. Lies, Eliza said hotly. I know where Caleb was. Thornton interrupted. Working the north pasture with Jake and 3 other hands. I already checked, but Crane's got deep pockets, and desperate men will say anything for silver. He's moving fast, Caleb said. Too fast. Something spooked him. Thornton's eyes sharpened. You know something. Wordlessly, Eliza handed him the journal. As the sheriff read, his expression grew darker. When he finished, he closed the book carefully. This changes things, but it's not enough. A journal entry about feeling threatened. Crane's lawyers will tear it apart. Then we need more, Caleb said. We need to be careful is what we need. Thornton warned. Crane didn't get where he is by being stupid, pushed too hard, too fast, and you'll end up like... He stopped, but they all knew what he meant. Like Margaret. I won't let him drive me off my land, Caleb said quietly. And I won't let him get away with murder. Then you'd better be smarter than he is, Thornton said, and luckier, and maybe say a few prayers while you're at it. He turned to go, then paused. Miss Hart, might be best if you stayed elsewhere for a while. Things are going to get ugly. Things are already ugly, Sheriff, Eliza replied. I'll take my chances. After Thornton left, they stood together in the kitchen, 3 people bound by circumstance and choice. Outside, the snow fell harder, as if trying to bury the whole world in white. But inside, warmed by the stove and their shared determination, they began to plan. Vincent Crane thought he'd won, thought he'd removed Margaret and would now claim what he'd always wanted. He was about to learn that some things couldn't be taken by force or fraud. Some things, like truth, like justice, like the bonds between people who refused to break, were stronger than all his money and all his men. The battle for the Morgan Ranch, for Margaret's justice, for the future of everyone in that kitchen, was about to begin in earnest. And Eliza Hart, seamstress turned warrior, would be in the thick of it, needle-sharp and twice as dangerous as any man with a gun. The snow kept falling, but it couldn't bury the truth. And come spring, when the white melted away, what was hidden would be revealed. Vincent Crane had sown the wind with his crimes. Now he would reap the whirlwind. The frozen creek cracked like gunshots under their horses' hooves as Caleb and Eliza made their way through the pine forest. 3 days had passed since Sheriff Thornton's warning. 3 days of careful planning and cautious movement. Now they were following a lead. Jake had heard from a Mexican vaquero that someone matching Crane's description had been seen near Skeleton Ridge the week Margaret died. There, Eliza pointed through the trees. The ridge rose before them, a wall of red rock dusted with snow, its base littered with the bleached bones that gave it its name, remnants of buffalo hunts from decades past. They dismounted, securing their horses in a sheltered grove. The wind cut through the pines with a mournful sound, and Eliza pulled her coat tighter. She'd traded her seamstress attire for more practical clothing, split skirt, heavy boots, a man's coat that had belonged to one of the ranch hands. If anyone from town could see her now, the scandal would be complete. Margaret came here to meet someone, Caleb said, studying the terrain with a tracker's eye. But where exactly? The ridge is miles long. She was precise in everything. Eliza reasoned. She wouldn't agree to meet somewhere vague. There must be a specific spot. They searched for an hour, the cold seeping through their clothes, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Then Caleb stopped, staring at a distinctive rock formation, 3 tall stones leaning together like conspirators. The 3 sisters, he said softly. Margaret named them that, said they reminded her of the fates from her Greek mythology books. His voice caught. She loved this spot in summer. You could see for miles. They approached carefully, and Eliza's sharp eyes caught something. Look, the snow's been disturbed here, near the base of the rocks. Caleb knelt, brushing away the fresh powder to reveal older, compressed snow beneath. And there, protected by an overhang, they found what they were looking for, and what made Eliza's blood run cold. Scraps of fabric, caught on the rocky ground, the distinctive blue wool of Margaret's riding habit, signs of a struggle, preserved by the shelter of the rocks. And worse, dark stains on the stone that could only be blood. This is where it happened, Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. Not where Jake found her. She was moved, to make it look like an accident. Eliza finished. She was already sketching the scene in a small notebook, documenting everything. But why meet here? What did they promise her? Caleb stood slowly, his eyes scanning the area with new understanding. Information about her father, maybe, or threats against me. Margaret was protective. If she thought meeting them would keep me safe. He broke off, moving to the eastern edge of the formation. Eliza, come see this. Hidden behind the largest of the 3 sisters was a natural shelter, a hollow in the rock just large enough for a man to wait in. And there, scratched into the stone with what looked like a knife point, were initials V.C. Vincent Crane, Eliza breathed. He was here, waiting for her. Caleb's hands clenched, like a spider in a web. They gathered what evidence they could. The fabric scraps, photographs Eliza made with a small camera she'd borrowed from the doctor in town, detailed notes of everything they found, but as they prepared to leave, the sound of approaching horses froze them in place. Behind the rocks, Caleb whispered, pulling Eliza into the shelter where Crane had likely waited for Margaret. The riders came into view, 4 men, hard-faced and well-armed. Leading them was Luther Deacon, one of the brothers who'd been with the mob that night. They stopped near the 3 sisters, dismounting with purpose. This is the place, Luther said. Crane wants it cleaned up proper. Can't have anyone finding what them two found. Seems like a lot of trouble for a dead woman, another man said. Luther spat tobacco juice into the snow. Crane pays well for silence. Besides, that journal's got him spooked. If anyone connects this place to the woman's death. They went to work, scattering the evidence, scraping away the blood stains, destroying in minutes what had been preserved for weeks. Eliza felt Caleb tense beside her, knew he was fighting the urge to confront them. 4 against 1, she whispered, her hand on his arm. And they're destroying evidence we've already documented. Let them think they've won. When the men finally left, laughing about the bonus Crane had promised them, Caleb and Eliza emerged from hiding. The site had been thoroughly disturbed, but they had what they needed. We have to get back, Eliza said. If Crane's men are cleaning up after him, he's planning something. They rode hard through the darkening forest, the horses struggling through deepening snow. As they crested a hill overlooking the ranch, Caleb pulled up sharp. Smoke, he said. Too much smoke. They could see it rising from the direction of the ranch, black and ominous against the white sky. Caleb spurred his horse forward, Eliza close behind, both fearing what they'd find. The barn was ablaze. Flames shot through the roof, sending sparks swirling into the snowy sky. Jake and the hands were already fighting it, forming a bucket brigade from the well, but it was clearly a losing battle. The horses had been evacuated, milling nervously in the corral, but the winter's hay supply was going up in smoke. Crane, Caleb said grimly, dismounting at a run. No, Jake called out, his face smudged with soot. Lightning strike. Saw it myself. Hit just as the storm was starting up. But Eliza noticed something the others had missed. Fresh wagon tracks leading away from the barn, deeper than they should be if the wagon had been empty. And near the barn door, a smell that didn't belong. Kerosene. She caught Jake's eye, saw the slight nod. He'd noticed too, but was keeping quiet. Smart man. They fought the fire until well past midnight, managing to save the structure but losing most of the stored feed. Without it, the cattle would starve before spring unless Caleb bought more, at prices sure to be inflated by those who knew his desperation. As the last embers were doused and the exhausted hands stumbled off to the bunkhouse, Jake approached Caleb and Eliza. Found this, he said quietly, producing a silver button, near where the fire started, mighty fancy for ranch wear. Eliza examined it closely. London-made. Expensive. The kind a banker might wear on his coat. Crane was here. Caleb said, it wasn't a question. While you were gone, Jake confirmed, came with papers, demanding to inspect the property. Said it was his right as a creditor. I couldn't stop him legally, not with his men backing him up. So he burned the barn. Can't prove it. Like I said, lightning strike. Terrible accident. Jake's expression was bitter. He made sure I saw the lightning hit. 2. Real convenient timing. Eliza felt the net tightening around them. Crane was escalating, moving from hidden murder to open economic warfare. He's trying to force you out before we can build a case. Then we need to move faster. Caleb turned toward the house, then stopped. Jake, double the night watch, and arm them. If Crane's getting bold enough to come here in daylight. Already done, boss. The boys are spoiling for a fight after this. Inside the house, Eliza made coffee while Caleb cleaned the soot from his face and hands. The kitchen was warm after the bitter cold outside, but she couldn't stop shivering. He's going to win, she said quietly. He has the money, the men, the connections. What do we have? Caleb sat across from her, his face etched with exhaustion and determination in equal measure. We have the truth, Margaret's journal, the evidence from Skeleton Ridge, your photographs and notes. Which prove what? That she met someone there, that she died there instead of where she was found? Any good lawyer could explain it away. Then we need more. Caleb leaned forward. Crane made a mistake tonight. He came here personally, left evidence. He's getting arrogant, careless. That's when men like him fall. Or when they get dangerous. Eliza countered. What if the next fire is the house? What if... She stopped, unable to voice her deepest fear. "What if he decides you're too much trouble?" Caleb finished. "I've thought of that. You should go. Eliza, tonight, take what I can give you and we've had this conversation." Her voice was steady despite her fear. "I'm not leaving. This isn't your fight." It became my fight the moment I read Margaret's journal, the moment I saw what they did to her. Eliza met his gaze squarely. "She was brave enough to face them alone. I won't dishonor that by running now." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a softening that made him look younger despite the gray in his hair. "You're a remarkable woman, Eliza Hart." "I'm a seamstress who's good at mending things," she corrected. "And right now, we need to mend this situation before it tears us all apart." They worked through the night, organizing their evidence, planning their next moves. Eliza transcribed Margaret's journal entries in her clear hand, making multiple copies. Caleb drew maps of Skeleton Ridge, marking where they'd found each piece of evidence. Together, they built a case that might stand up in court. As dawn broke gray and cold, Jake knocked on the door. "Riders coming? Looks like the sheriff." But it wasn't just Thornton. Judge Patterson himself rode beside him, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for strict honesty. Behind them came 2 federal marshals, their badges glinting in the weak morning light. "Judge," Caleb said, surprised. "What brings you out here?" Patterson dismounted stiffly, his expression grave. "Vincent Crane filed papers yesterday. He's claiming immediate seizure of your property based on default of debt. I'm here to review the situation personally." "And the marshals?" "Are here at my request." Thornton interjected. "Given the accusations flying around, I wanted federal oversight, keep everything legal and proper. Unlike Crane's midnight visits," Eliza said. Patterson's sharp eyes fixed on her. "You have something to say about that, Miss Hart?" This was their chance. Eliza looked at Caleb, saw his slight nod, and made her choice. "Yes, Your Honor, we have quite a bit to say. About Vincent Crane, about Margaret Morgan's death, and about how the two are connected." "Those are serious accusations," Patterson warned. "We have evidence." Caleb said, "Margaret's own words, physical proof from where she really died, and witness to Crane's attempts to destroy that evidence." The judge was silent for a long moment, studying them both. Then he turned to the marshals. "Secure the property. No one in or out without my permission." To Caleb and Eliza, "You have 1 hour to present your case. If you convince me there's merit, I'll order a full investigation. If not," he didn't need to finish. "If not, Caleb would lose everything." They gathered in the parlor, the morning light filtering through curtains Eliza had mended with her own hands. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the scars of the previous night's fire. "Very well," Judge Patterson said, settling into his chair like a king on his throne. "Show me what you have, and pray to God it's enough." Eliza opened Margaret's journal and began to read, her clear voice filling the room with the words of a dead woman seeking justice. Beside her, Caleb laid out their evidence piece by piece, building a case against the man who thought himself untouchable. The storm outside intensified, but inside, the truth was finally being spoken. And sometimes, Eliza thought as she turned another page, the truth was the sharpest weapon of all. Sometimes, it was enough to bring down kingdoms. The night erupted in gunfire just as the courthouse clock struck midnight. Vincent Crane had come for war, bringing 20 hired guns with him, their faces masked against the swirling snow. They surrounded the Morgan ranch like wolves circling wounded prey, their torches casting hellish shadows across the white landscape. "Positions!" Jake Sullivan roared, already at his post by the front window. The ranch hands scrambled for cover, rifles in hand. They'd been expecting this since Judge Patterson had ordered a full investigation that afternoon. Crane couldn't afford to let the evidence reach a courtroom. Caleb pushed Eliza down behind an overturned table. "Stay low. They'll try to burn us out when the shooting doesn't work." "Morgan," Crane's voice carried across the frozen air. You've got one chance. Come out, sign over the deeds, and I'll let your people go. Otherwise, we'll paint this snow red with blood." "Go to hell, Crane," Caleb shouted back, checking his ammunition. "The federal marshals know what you've done. It's over. The marshals left hours ago." Crane laughed, cold and mirthless. "Urgent business back in Denver," they said. "Amazing what a few gold eagles can accomplish." Eliza's heart sank. Their protection was gone, bought off by Crane's deep pockets. They were alone against overwhelming odds. The first volley shattered windows, showering them with glass. Eliza pressed herself flat, feeling splinters rain down on her back. Beside her, Caleb returned fire with deadly accuracy, his shots measured and deliberate. "The barn!" someone shouted. Through the broken window, Eliza could see flames already licking at what remained of the structure from the previous fire. But this time, the wind was carrying sparks toward the house. "He's trying to smoke us out," Jake said grimly. "Reloading, just like he did to the Hendersons last year." More gunfire erupted from the bunkhouse, where half the hands had taken position. The night became a chaos of muzzle flashes and shouting men. Eliza found herself loading rifles for Caleb and Jake, her fingers steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. Horses approaching from the east, away from Crane's men. More attackers? They were surrounded. "Boss!" one of the hands called out. "Riders coming in fast!" But the war cry that split the night wasn't from Crane's hired killers. It was a sound Eliza had heard only in stories, the ululating call of Comanche warriors. "What in the hell?" Jake muttered. Through the smoke and snow came a band of riders, moving like ghosts across the landscape. Leading them was a figure Caleb recognized. Joseph Two Horses, son of a chief who'd traded with Caleb's father decades ago. The Comanche struck Crane's men from behind, their arrows finding targets with lethal precision. The surprise attack threw the hired guns into chaos. Men who'd been brave enough against ranchers and cowboys found themselves facing warriors who'd been fighting on these plains since before their grandfathers were born. "Why?" Eliza gasped, watching the tide of battle turn. "Water rights," Caleb said, understanding flooding through him. "If Crane takes this land, he'll dam Willow Creek. The tribe's winter camp depends on that water." The fighting intensified. Crane's men, caught between the ranch defenders and the Comanche attack, began to break. Some fled into the night. Others tried to ford up behind overturned wagons. The snow turned red, just as Crane had promised, but it was his men's blood staining the ground. In the chaos, Eliza saw movement by the side door. Luther Deacon creeping toward the house with a torch in hand. Without thinking, she grabbed a shotgun and stepped out to meet him. "Drop it," she commanded, both barrels trained on his chest. Luther sneered. "You won't shoot, Seamstress. You don't have the stones. Margaret Morgan was braver than you," Eliza said steadily. "She died fighting scum like you. I won't dishonor her memory by showing mercy to her killers." Something in her eyes must have convinced him. Luther dropped the torch, raising his hands, but as Eliza moved to secure him, a shot rang out. Luther crumpled, a red stain spreading across his chest. Vincent Crane stood 20 feet away, smoking pistol in hand. "Coward!" He spat at Luther's body. "Can't trust anyone to do a job right." He turned the gun on Eliza. "You've caused me considerable trouble, Miss Hart. Time to end it." The shot was impossibly loud, but it was Crane who staggered, looking down in shock at the arrow protruding from his shoulder. Joseph Two Horses sat his paint pony like a statue, already notching another arrow. "The seamstress is under our protection," Joseph said in clear English, "as are all who defend the water." Crane snarled, trying to raise his pistol again. This time it was Caleb's rifle that spoke. The banker spun and fell, his blood dark against the snow. The shooting gradually died away. Crane's men, leaderless and outnumbered, surrendered or fled. The ranch defenders emerged from cover, battered but victorious. 3 of Caleb's hands were wounded, none fatally. The Comanche had lost 1 warrior, whom they lifted gently onto a horse to take home for proper burial. Joseph. 2 horses dismounted, approaching Caleb with dignity. Your father traded fair with my people. You honor his memory by protecting the water. We repay our debts. This debt is mine now, Caleb said, clasping the warrior's arm. The water flows free for your people, always. Joseph nodded, then turned to Eliza. You have a warrior's heart. Seamstress, my sister makes fine beadwork. Perhaps you will trade with us, as the Morgan men have done. I would be honored, Eliza said, still shaking from her confrontation with death. As the Comanche melted back into the night, Sheriff Thornton arrived with a posse of townsmen. He surveyed the carnage with a grim expression. Got word of trouble. Looks like we're too late. Just in time to arrest the survivors. Jake said dryly. They found Vincent Crane still alive, though badly wounded. As the doctor worked on him, he raved about his rights, his money, his power. But the evidence was overwhelming now. His own men testified against him to save their necks, confirming he'd ordered Margaret's death when she refused to convince Caleb to sell. She laughed at me. Crane gasped as they loaded him into a wagon. Said I was a small man with small dreams. Said her husband was worth 10 of me. She was right, Eliza said quietly. As dawn broke over the battlefield, Eliza found herself standing with Caleb on the porch, watching the sun paint the snow-covered plains gold and rose. The house bore new scars, bullet holes, scorch marks, broken windows. But it stood. It's over, Caleb said, though he sounded like he could hardly believe it. The fighting is, Eliza agreed. The rest, that's just beginning. He turned to her, this woman who'd stood beside him through hell and gunfire, who'd faced down killers and helped solve a murder. Eliza, don't, she said gently. Not yet. Margaret deserves her time of mourning, and you need time to heal. But after? She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. After, we'll see. I still have curtains to mend, and now windows to measure. Your house needs considerable work, Mr. Morgan. As do I, he admitted. Think you're up for that kind of mending? I've handled worse, she said, thinking of all the torn fabric she'd made whole again. Though you may be my biggest challenge yet. They stood together as the ranch came alive around them, hands tending to wounds and damage, beginning the long work of rebuilding. In the distance, a lone rider appeared. Judge Patterson, returning with federal marshals who hadn't been bought after all. They'd been waiting nearby, letting Crane commit himself fully before moving in. You took a terrible risk, the judge would tell them later. But sometimes justice requires such risks. Jake approached with coffee, strong and black. Hell of a night, he observed. Though I've got to say, watching Miss Eliza face down Luther with that scattergun was worth the price of admission. I was terrified, Eliza admitted. Courage ain't about not being scared. Jake said, it's about doing what needs doing despite the fear. You've got sand. Miss Margaret would have been proud. As the sun climbed higher, warming the frozen land, Eliza felt something shift inside her. She'd come here to mend clothes and organize closets. Instead, she'd helped solve a murder, survived a siege, and found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. The wealthy rancher buried his bride. She murmured, remembering the words Caleb had spoken in grief and guilt. Until the seamstress mended his heart. Caleb finished, understanding. Though I think you've mended more than that. Eliza Hart. The work's not done, she said practically. Mending never is. There's always another tear, another hole to patch. Then stay, he said simply. Help me rebuild. Not as a hired seamstress, but as whatever you choose to be. She looked out over the ranch, scarred but surviving, where Margaret had lived and loved and died bravely, where men had fought for water and justice, where a woman with the needle and thread had found courage she didn't know she possessed. I'll stay, she said, but on one condition. Name it. We build something new, not trying to recreate what was, but honoring it while moving forward. Margaret's memory deserves that. Agreed, Caleb said. Though I warn you, I'm not an easy man to live with. Ask anyone. I'm not an easy woman to live with either, Eliza replied. I suspect we'll manage. The war was over. Vincent Crane would hang for Margaret's murder. The ranch would rebuild. And somewhere in the space between grief and hope, two damaged souls would try to create something whole. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as Eliza looked at the man beside her, scarred, grieving, but unbroken, she thought it might just be possible. After all, she'd mended harder things than hearts. The sun rose full and bright, burning away the shadows of night, promising that even after the darkest storm, morning always came again. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Morgan Ranch, painting the frost-covered prairie in shades of pearl and gold. 3 months had passed since the night of violence, and the scars were healing, both on the land and in the hearts of those who worked it. Eliza stood in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. Through the window, she could see Caleb working with the horses, his movements sure and gentle. The ranch had come alive again under their shared care, though neither had spoken of what they were building together beyond the daily work of survival. Letter came, Jake announced, entering with a handful of mail from town. His weathered face was troubled. From the court in Denver, Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, taking the official-looking envelope. Inside was the expected news. Vincent Crane had been found guilty of Margaret Morgan's murder. The hanging was set for next week. Will you go? She asked when Caleb came in for the noon meal. He was quiet for a long moment, washing the dust from his hands. No. Watching him die won't bring her back. Won't change what happened. The town expects you to be there. They'll talk if you don't. Let them talk. He sat heavily at the table. I've had enough of death. Eliza, it's time to focus on living. She served the meal beef stew, fresh bread, preserved peaches from Margaret's trees. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that comes from months of working side by side, of understanding without words. Sheriff Thornton stopped by while you were in the North Pasture, she said eventually. Wanted to know our plans. Our plans? Don't play dense. Caleb Morgan, the whole town is watching us, waiting to see what happens next. A widow seamstress living at the ranch of a widowed rancher. It's the favorite topic at every quilting bee and church social. You're not living here, he pointed out. You ride out each morning from town, a distinction that's lost on the gossips. She began clearing the dishes. Martha Pretty informed me yesterday that I'm a scandal to decent women everywhere. Martha Pretty wouldn't recognize decency if it bit her on her bustle. Caleb said, but if it bothers you, what bothers me, Eliza interrupted, is the pretense. We work this ranch together. We've bled for it together. Yet I maintain a room in town I barely use, riding back and forth like some kind of guilty secret. Caleb stood, moving to the window. Outside, the ranch stretched endlessly under the vast sky. What are you saying? I'm saying Margaret has been gone 6 months. Her killer will hang next week. At some point, we need to decide what we are to each other. She joined him at the window. Unless you'd prefer I leave, find work elsewhere. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. No, I don't want that. Then what do you want? He turned to face her. This woman who'd become essential to his days without him quite knowing how. She wasn't beautiful in the way Margaret had been, all fire and flash. Eliza was steady earth, deep water, the kind of beauty that grew stronger with knowing. I want to stop pretending, he said finally. Stop acting like you're just the hired help when you're the one who's brought this place back to life. Stop denying what's been growing between us because I'm afraid of dishonoring Margaret's memory. And what has been growing between us? Eliza asked, though her heart was already racing with hope, instead of answering with words. Caleb cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. When she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. I love you, he said when they broke apart. Not like I loved Margaret. That was young love, wild and reckless. This is deeper, quieter. like bedrock under shifting sand. A seamstress and a rancher. Eliza murmured. The town will have a field day. Let them. We've faced worse than wagging tongues. A commotion in the yard interrupted them. Jake's voice raised in challenge, followed by others Eliza didn't recognize. They hurried outside to find a group of well-dressed men dismounting from a fancy carriage, looking as out of place on the ranch as peacocks in a henhouse. The leader, a thin man with pompous whiskers, stepped forward. Mr. Caleb Morgan? I'm Morgan. Reginald Ashford, attorney at law. I represent the estate of Vincent Crane. He produced a sheaf of papers. I'm here to inform you that Mr. Crane's will leaves his considerable holdings to his cousin in Chicago. However, there are certain complications. What kind of complications? Caleb asked warily. It seems Mr. Crane kept meticulous records of his business dealings, including documents suggesting your late wife's father owed significantly more than previously disclosed. The estate is prepared to pursue these debts. You vultures, Jake spat. Man's not even cold in the ground and you're already picking at the bones. Business is business, Ashford said primly. However, we're prepared to make a generous offer. Sell the Morgan Ranch to the estate, and all debts will be forgiven. You'll have enough to start over elsewhere. No, Caleb said flatly. Be reasonable. Mr. Morgan, fighting this in court will take years, cost more than you have, and there's no guarantee you'll win. I said no. Ashford's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice but to— Actually, Eliza interrupted, I think you'll find those debts have already been settled. Everyone turned to stare at her. She continued calmly. I've spent considerable time organizing Margaret's papers. She was quite thorough in her record-keeping, including receipts showing her father paid Crane back every penny with interest, just before her marriage to Caleb. Impossible, Ashford blustered. We have no record of such payments, because Crane destroyed them. But Margaret kept copies, along with correspondence where Crane acknowledged the payments but threatened to claim otherwise if she didn't convince Caleb to sell water rights. Eliza smiled sweetly. Would you like to see them? I'm sure the court would find them fascinating. Ashford's face went through several colors before settling on an unhealthy purple. This is highly irregular. What's irregular? Sheriff Thornton said, appearing around the corner with two deputies. Is trying to collect on debts already paid. Sounds like fraud to me. We'll need to verify these supposed documents, Ashford said weakly. By all means, Eliza said. Judge Patterson has the originals. We provided them during Crane's trial, though they weren't needed for the murder conviction. I'm sure he'd be happy to discuss them with you. The lawyers retreated in disarray, their carriage raising dust as it fled back toward town. Thornton tipped his hat to Eliza. Ma'am, remind me never to get on your bad side. You just sent those city boys running with their tails tucked. I merely presented facts, Eliza said modestly. With the timing of a gunfighter. Jake added admiringly, You let them show their whole hand before playing your ace. After the sheriff left, Caleb caught Eliza's arm. How long have you known about those receipts? Since my second week here. Margaret hid them in her sewing box, under the thread spools. She met his gaze steadily. I was waiting for the right moment to reveal them. Crane's lawyers just provided it. You could have told me earlier, saved me months of worry. You had enough to deal with, besides. She smiled slightly. I wanted to be sure they'd hold up legally. I may have spent some evenings studying law books at the courthouse. Caleb shook his head in amazement. Is there anything else you're keeping from me? Well, I did take the liberty of having Jake teach me to shoot, and I may have been corresponding with cattle buyers in Kansas City about next year's drive. And there's the matter of the new curtains I ordered from San Francisco, Margaret's favorite pattern, but in colors I thought you'd prefer. Anything else? She pretended to consider. I believe that's all. Oh, except for the fact that I love you too. Did I mention that? He laughed, the sound rich and full in a way she'd never heard before. No, you didn't. Well, I do. Have for some time now. Probably since the night you made me stay through that first storm. She smoothed her hands over her apron, suddenly shy. If the offer still stands, I'd like to stop this foolish back and forth to town, make this my home proper. As my wife? Caleb asked, wanting to be clear. If you'll have me, though I warn you, I have opinions about ranch management, and I fully intend to keep doing the books. You're terrible with numbers. I know. Margaret used to say. He stopped, looking uncertain. It's all right, Eliza said gently. She was your wife. She loved this place. We can honor that while building something new. You're sure? People will compare. Say I'm trying to replace her. People will say what they will regardless. What matters is what we know. She took his hands in hers. I'm not Margaret. I don't ride like the wind or charm horses with a whisper, but I can balance ledgers and mend what's broken and stand beside you when trouble comes. If that's enough, it's everything, Caleb said firmly. You're everything. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, they stood together on the porch, the ranch spread before them, scarred but healing, productive again under their combined care. When? Caleb asked. After the hanging, Eliza decided. Let that chapter close properly, then we can start our own. A spring wedding, then small, simple, just family and true friends. In the meadow by Willow Creek, where the wildflowers bloom. Margaret would like that, Eliza said softly. Yes, Caleb agreed. She would. Jake emerged from the bunkhouse, saw them standing close together, and grinned. About damn time, he called. The hands have been taking bets on when you two would stop dancing around each other. And? Caleb asked. I won, Jake said smugly. Said it would be today. Something about the way Miss Eliza was attacking that bread dough this morning. Looked like a woman ready to knead some sense into stubborn men. They laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the dying light. The land was at peace. Winter giving way to the promise of spring. No more secrets, Caleb asked. No more secrets, Eliza promised, except maybe about that new bull I've been negotiating for. You did say you wanted to improve the bloodline. Woman, you'll be the death of me. Unlikely. I have too much invested in keeping you alive now. She leaned into his warmth as the evening chill set in. We have an empire to build. Caleb Morgan. Margaret started it with courage and love. We'll finish it with determination and partnership. And love? He asked. That too, she agreed. Always that. As stars began to prick the darkening sky, they went inside together. Not as employer and seamstress, not as two people broken by loss, but as partners ready to face whatever the future might bring. The wealthy rancher had buried his bride, mourned her properly, and found justice for her death. Now, with the seamstress who'd mended more than just fabric, he was ready to live again. The ghosts were at peace. The living could finally move forward. Spring arrived like a blessing over the Morgan Ranch, painting the prairie in shades of green and gold. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion along Willow Creek, their colors vivid against the new grass. It was the kind of morning that made the harsh winter seem like a distant dream. Eliza stood before the mirror in what had been Margaret's room, now hers, adjusting the simple ivory dress she'd sewn herself. No elaborate wedding gown for her, just clean lines and quality fabric, adorned only with her mother's cameo at the throat. You look beautiful, said Mrs. Fletcher, the schoolmarm who'd surprised everyone by offering to help Eliza prepare. Caleb Morgan is a fortunate man. We're both fortunate, Eliza replied, smoothing her skirts. To find love twice in one lifetime is a gift not everyone receives. Through the window, she could see the meadow where a small gathering waited. Judge Patterson had agreed to officiate. Sheriff Thornton stood as Caleb's witness, and Jake Sullivan had polished his boots for the occasion. The ranch hands formed a rough honor guard, their faces scrubbed and hair slicked down. Joseph Two Horses had come with his family, bringing gifts of beaded leather and dried meat. The water agreement between the ranch and the tribe had held firm, creating an alliance that benefited both. His sister had indeed become one of Eliza's regular trading partners, exchanging beadwork for fabric and notions. As Eliza walked toward the meadow, she passed Margaret's grave, now covered in spring grass and wildflowers. She paused, laying a small bouquet on the stone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving him first, for making him the man he is. I promise to take care of what you started." The ceremony was simple, the vows heartfelt. Caleb's voice was steady as he promised to honor and cherish, though his eyes held depths of emotion. Eliza's words were clear and strong, promising partnership in all things, come drought or plenty. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Patterson intoned, and Caleb did. To the cheers of the assembled crowd, the celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by the ranch hands and neighboring women who'd forgiven Eliza her scandal now that it was properly resolved. Fiddle music filled the air, and even stern Sheriff Thornton was seen dancing with the banker's wife. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in familiar shades of rose and gold, Caleb found Eliza standing by the creek, watching the water flow. "No regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "None," she said firmly. "You? Only that it took us so long to get here. Things happen in their time," Eliza said philosophically. "We both had healing to do first." Jake approached, grinning broadly. "Boss, Mrs. Boss, the hands have a wedding gift for you." He led them to the barn, rebuilt stronger than before. Inside, in a specially constructed stall, stood a magnificent stallion, black as midnight with a white star on his forehead. "Bought him with our poker winnings," one of the hands explained. "Figured the ranch could use new bloodlines, like Mrs. Eliza's been saying. He's beautiful." Eliza breathed, already calculating the improvements to their breeding program. "Practical woman," Caleb said fondly. "Even on her wedding day, she's thinking about ranch business." "Our ranch," she corrected. "Our business, our future." As the celebration wound down and guests departed, Eliza and Caleb stood on their porch, watching the stars emerge. The house behind them glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, and the endless prairie stretched beneath the vast sky. "Margaret would have been happy today," Caleb said quietly. "Yes," Eliza agreed. She loved this place too much to want it to die with her. She'd want it to thrive, to grow, to shelter love again. They went inside together, to the home that had known sorrow and violence, but now held hope and promise. Eliza paused in the parlor, running her hand over the curtains she'd mended that first day. "From such small beginnings," she murmured. "The best things often start that way." Caleb replied, "A torn curtain, a woman with skillful hands, a man too stubborn to see what was right in front of him. He saw eventually," Eliza said, smiling. "That's what matters." Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of spring flowers and new growth. The Morgan Ranch stood solid and enduring, a testament to love, loss, and the resilience of the human heart. In the morning, there would be work, cattle to tend, books to balance, a ranch to run. But tonight, there was only the quiet joy of two people who'd found each other across a landscape of grief and emerged into the light. The wealthy rancher had buried his bride, mourned her properly, and found new love with the seamstress who'd mended his heart with patience, courage, and skill. Their story would be told in Mercy's Bend for generations, a reminder that even in the harshest landscape, love could bloom again. As Eliza blew out the last lamp, she smiled. Tomorrow she'd finish the new curtains for the dining room. After all, there was always mending to be done. But sometimes, she'd learned, the most important mending happened not with needle and thread, but with time, understanding, and the courage to love again. The prairie night embraced the house, peaceful and eternal. And in that vast darkness, two hearts beat as one. Proof that some things, once broken, could indeed be made whole again, different than before, perhaps, but beautiful in their own way. The end had become a beginning. And that, Eliza thought as sleep claimed her, was the finest mending of all. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Caleb and Eliza's journey from grief to redemption. Where are you listening to this tale right now? Please leave a comment below to let me know. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of love, loss, and triumph on the American frontier. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. What touched your heart? What surprised you? Your feedback means everything. Until next time, partners.